Shalom, and welcome to our History Podcast. This is a production of KingdomPreppers.org. I'm your host, Kingdom Prepper, and you're listening to Churchianity, 2000 Years of Leaven. We continue with our history. Part 32, The Calling Out Process, Final Podcast. Christianity emerged amidst European powers and was therefore Eurocentric in its origin and throughout its formative years. That Eurocentric nature is even evident in the rise of America and other world powers, but this is also according to prophecy. While Christianity enjoyed its greatest European height during the most dominant years of papal supremacy, and it spread like a mysterious plague during the Great Awakenings, its power waned considerably in the 20th century, being eclipsed by the new unofficial religion called Capitalism. Capitalism, it must be stated, reigns over the entire earth, making merchandise of nearly every conceivable thing, which it then incorporates into its all-consuming structure. Even politics is subject to capitalism. You need only look to Wall Street and the many deep-pocketed lobbyists who descend on Washington, D.C. to note that. But in order to see how this is all according to prophecy, even being fulfilled according to a specific timeline, you would have to apply prophetic symbols to their appropriate existing counterparts. Those who believe that the United States is Babylon, for instance, and use various analogies to prove that out, will not see the true prophetic purpose of America. Babylon is essentially a beast rider, not having enough power in and of herself to be considered a beast. She manipulates and influences beast powers. America, on the other hand, is large enough and powerful enough to exist as a beast, however, and does not ride something more powerful than itself. The rules of this great dynamic are carefully laid out in the books of Daniel and Revelation, which both state that beasts are in fact kingdoms, and their horns kings.
Daniel declared, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea, and four great beasts came up out of the sea, different from one another. Then I desired to know the truth about the fourth beast, which was different from all the rest. Thus he said, As for the fourth beast, there shall be a fourth kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all the kingdoms.
Daniel 7, verses 2, 3, 19, and 23.
And I saw a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 diadems on its horns and blasphemous names on its heads. And to it the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority.
Revelation 13, verses 1 to 2. Unlike the harlot, Babylon, this beast from the sea is endowed with power from the dragon, who we know from Revelation chapter 12 is the devil.
And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent, who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world.
Revelation 12, verse 9. The first beast of Revelation 13 arises from the sea, because it emerges at a time when a multiplicity of peoples, speaking various languages, exists within burgeoning nations. This is none other than Europe, where Rome emerged as a dominant power prior to being overtaken by a spate of barbarian tribes. These various nations and peoples are represented as a sea or waters. When the papacy began to manipulate European kings and steer the fate of nations from behind the scenes, this was the prostitute sitting on those waters, as pictured in the 17th chapter of Revelation.
The waters that you saw, where the prostitute is seated, are peoples and multitudes and nations and languages.
Revelation 17, verse 15. But a second beast, which is mentioned in the very same chapter, arises not from the sea, but from the earth, signifying an absence of the complex dynamic of nation-states, feudal laws, a state religion, sophisticated economic trade between peoples, and other societal elements present in Europe.
Then I saw another beast rising out of the earth.
Revelation 13, verse 11. Wherever this beast emerged, none of that was present. This cannot be said of the African continent, which was already inhabited by diverse peoples, various tribal nations, and filled with many languages. Asia too must be counted out for the same reasons. In fact, the only puzzle piece that fits are the lands that were inhabited solely by Native Americans, who had not created the kinds of complex and diverse societies seen elsewhere in the world. Other areas of the world could not be conquered in the way they were, and Europeans gazed on their holdings like virgin earth or virgin territory. In his book, American Architectural History, author Keith L. Eggener writes,
"The first European settlers in what is now the U.S. saw the American landscape as virgin territory, raw and undeveloped. They brought with them tools and memories, patterns and conventions, which they used to shape their new homes. Never again would the American continent seem so utterly and frighteningly void of design as it did to these first settlers, so in need of ordering systems for its habitation and successful exploitation."
And as a second witness, Chris Gosden writes in his book Archaeology and Colonialism,
"Virginia was a double play on words. It contained a homage to the Virgin Queen on the part of Raleigh, but it also represented virgin territory for Europeans to acquire and use."
The interesting thing is, the second beast of Revelation 13 is only referred to as the second beast or another beast in this chapter. In subsequent chapters, it is referred to as something else entirely. And I have not heard anyone address this important shift directly, though it is of extreme prophetic importance. A clue as to what it was called was a subject of our previous podcast. Now, bear in mind, this takes spiritual discernment, and it is not readily apparent to most. Remember, there are two beasts mentioned in Revelation 13, but following that chapter, only the first beast is referred to by the term beast. This is the case in verses like Revelation 14, verse 11, and 15, verse 2, which are in fact referring to the first beast of Revelation 13, whom the second beast forces the whole world to worship, according to Revelation 13, verse 12. Now, to learn what the primary role of the second beast is, which is revealed in the title it is given in other chapters, you have to understand the following.
It performs great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in front of people. And by the signs that it is allowed to work in the presence of the beast, it deceives those who dwell on earth.
Revelation 13, verses 13 to 14. Consider the phrase, "it performs great signs," making fire come down from heaven to earth in front of people. What could this be referencing? The answer is found in 1 Kings 18. The full story is told in verses 20 to 40, but in summary, a contest of sorts was arranged at Mount Carmel between King Ahab's prophets, the prophets of Baal and Asherah, and Elijah, the prophet of Yah. To finally prove who was the true prophet and who were the false, Elijah ordered that 2 bulls be slain, cut in pieces, and laid on wood piles with no fire kindled. This was to be special burnt offerings, with the idea that the fire that would consume either sacrifice would come from Yah, directly from heaven, which would identify the true prophet. Ahab's prophets went first, calling on the name of Baal from morning to noon, but there was no answer. In the end, they cut themselves with swords and lances until blood gushed, according to their custom. Elijah's turn came, and he gathered the people around him and went through the motions of preparing his sacrifice. Finally, he prayed to Yah, saying, "Let it be known this day that you are Elohim in Israel, and that I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your word." The payoff comes in verse 38.
Then the fire of Yah fell and consumed the burnt offerings and the wood and stone and dust, and licked up the water that was in the trench.
1 Kings 18, verse 38. To add to this equation, Yeshua, in revealing the signs of the times to his disciples, said,
"For false messiahs and false prophets will arise and perform great signs and wonders, so as to lead astray, if possible, even the elect."
Matthew 24, verse 24. These passages are directly related to Revelation 13 verse 13 and are in fact clues that point to the fulfillment of John's prophecy. The second beast's power performed great signs, which is the exact phrasing Yeshua used in describing a distinct group of people who would emerge to lead many astray. By those signs, the second beast was able to deceive those who dwell on the earth, we are told. Some may be looking for literal fulfillments of this prophecy, and while there are individuals who literally perform signs and wonders and deceive people, the prophecy concerning this second beast is largely symbolic, given the clues that point to it. The fact that the second beast calls down fire directs our attention to a specific portion of Scripture, which we already covered. This refers to Elijah, who was a prophet. So all we are being told in Revelation 13 verse 13 is that the second beast is in some way a prophet. The fire from heaven phrasing is used as an identifying marker. The rest of verses 13 and 14 give us additional information. This is a false prophet we're dealing with, as its actions fit the very description Yeshua himself gave. And this is exactly why the second beast is referred to as just that in subsequent chapters of Revelation, the first of which is this one.
And I saw, coming out of the mouth of the dragon, and out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet, 3 unclean spirits, like frogs.
Revelation 16, verse 13. The second beast, the false prophet in question, rises out of the earth, unlike the first beast. Following the Protestant Reformation, Europeans migrated to the New World, peopling the colonies and infusing them primarily with their borrowed religion, which was Catholicism 2.0. You see, European Catholics invented the thing that is called Christianity, and it was legalized chiefly by European kings like Constantine. History bears that out. Of course, the prostitute who rides that beast's power stole the concept from the emissaries and falsely reinterpreted it, but it is essentially a Catholic concept. American Protestantism, on the other hand, is Catholicism with brighter colors and a variety of styles to choose from. It is a repackaging, in other words, or the second beast causing the world to worship the first beast by embracing Protestant Christianity. And this it does by way of deception or false prophecy. This is clear judging from the events in our previous podcast. For Christians, heaven is the place where the dead go immediately upon death, and there is no law since everyone is saved by grace. There is a pre-tribulation rapture from which the righteous will be spared, and hell is an eternally burning place, and so many other misconceptions. But as to that last one, let's pursue it further, since it ties directly into our previous podcast, as well as Revelation 13.
We'll be back with more exciting scriptural history in a moment. We now continue with our podcast.
It is important to remember that beasts in Scripture represent nations, usually large, powerful ones that control or greatly influence other nations. But the general rule is, in order to qualify as a beast, you have to also control the spiritual fate of citizens within your territorial boundaries, which must include Yah's chosen people, true Israel. This was the case with ancient Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, Byzantium, the Holy Roman Empire, etc. We are told in Revelation 13, verse 14, that the second beast, which rises out of the earth, the false prophet,
It deceives those who dwell on earth, telling them to make an image for the beast that was wounded by the sword and yet lived.
So the second beast orders the people to make an image to the first beast. This is interesting language, and people tend to interpret it in all manner of ways. In short, the first chapter of the book of Genesis has Yah saying,
Let us make man in our image, after our likeness.
Genesis 1, verse 26. The result was Adam, who was a physical manifestation of the Father and his Son. Then in the 5th chapter of that book we are told,
When Adam had lived 130 years, he fathered a son in his own likeness, after his image, and named him Seth.
Genesis 5, verse 3. Having something formed in your image, after your likeness, is simply referring to a close copy or replica. It is safe to say that Adam did not look exactly like the Father, nor did Seth look exactly like Adam, but they were close enough to the original. In considering the second beast of Revelation 13, who orders people to make an image to the first beast, we have to consider what the first beast was like. Heading back to Revelation 13, the first few verses give us a description of the first beast. It has horns and heads and crowns, which signifies rulers and sovereign power. Interestingly, the next description is the appearance, which was like a leopard and bear and lion. If you head over to Daniel chapter 7 and read Daniel's visions of 4 beasts, you'll see the same animal representations. This means the elements of Babylon, Medo-Persia, and Greece would be absorbed into the government, culture, economy, societal makeup, and religion of the next ruling power, Rome and its offshoots. The first beast also spoke blasphemies, yet it received worship. Worship is actually a big deal with this beast, seeing it is mentioned several times. This beast also goes out to make war with Yah's set-apart ones and succeeds in conquering them. Listen to episodes 24 and 29 to see both the first and second beasts fulfilling this action. The image of this beast, therefore, must represent several of these characteristics. But most important among the many aspects mentioned is the religious one. The first beast enforced Catholicism. That was its state religion. The second beast enforced Protestantism, as that was its state religion, particularly during the colonial period. In 2003, Melvin E. Page and Penny M. Sonnenberg released Colonialism, an international, social, cultural, and political encyclopedia, Volume 1. On page 496 of that volume, we read,
Of all religions, Christianity has been most associated with colonialism because several of its forms, Catholicism and Protestantism, were the religions of the European powers engaged in colonial enterprise.
One of the characteristics of the first beast is its dependence on an invention known as purgatory, which we have covered over the course of this series. This is occupied with the false notion of hell, and lay Catholics had no hope of bypassing these non-existent places and heading off to heaven without the mercy, intercession, and forgiveness of priests and popes. But the concept of hell must be looked at from a proper Hebrew perspective. The word hell is derived from the Hebrew Sheol, word H7585. Scholars have attempted to link this word to Catholic concepts like a place of burning or even purgatory, but its foundational meaning is the grave or a pit for burial. When someone dies, they are usually placed in Sheol or the grave. In Greek, this is called Hades. Some pronounce it Hades, which is word G86, but the senses have all been mythologized to mean supernatural nonsense. That being said, hell, or Hades, which is the grave, follows death. Simple concept. When we look at Revelation chapter 20, we see something interesting about both.
Then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire.
Revelation 20, verse 14. Hell, which is supposedly an eternally burning place, is itself cast into a lake of fire? Doesn't make sense. What makes sense is this: eternity will have no place for death and burial, since each and every soul will be immortal. If you take note of Revelation 19 verse 20 and 20 verse 10, you'll see that the devil, the first beast, and the false prophet, which is the second beast, are all thrown into the same lake of fire, as there will be no place in eternity for these evil beings and institutions either. But getting back to the hell concept, which is an important aspect of the religion of the first beast, the false prophet orders the deceived inhabitants of the world to make an image to this beast. Then we are told,
And it was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast might even speak and might cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain.
Revelation 13, verse 15. The word slain here is killed, word G615, apoktaino. While Revelation has a few literal prophetic applications, this one, like several others, is metaphorical, since it relates to concepts within a broad metaphor: beasts and images, a dragon, signs and wonders. You get the idea. So in considering this, we should jump straight to the second sense of apoktaino.
Sense 2a. Metaphorically, to extinguish or abolish, to inflict moral death.
Remember, this is referring to the word slain or killed. We're talking about a metaphoric moral death, not a literal one. But the second sense gets to the heart of the matter.
2b. To deprive of spiritual life and procure eternal misery.
Essentially, in hell. The first beast is guilty of this. For since ancient times, the prostitute seated upon its back openly declared that souls would be doomed to damnation apart from Catholicism. The second beast breathed these very lies, giving life to an image of this. The fire and brimstone preachers of the Great Awakenings said the very same things, but in a more sensational manner as it pertained to Protestantism. And this has changed little over time.
There is no salvation in hell. There's no Savior in hell. There's no Bible in hell. There's no blood in hell. There's no altars in hell. There's no forgiveness in hell. Whatever goes to hell stays in hell.
This kind of preaching, as the second sense of apoktaino points out, has deprived audience members of spiritual life, leaving many of them to feel they will procure eternal misery in a place of burning called hell if they do not become Protestant Christians by joining a local church. This is Revelation 13 verse 15 in action. Christianity, from the harlot mother church down to her daughters.
She has become a dwelling place for demons, a haunt for every unclean spirit, a haunt for every unclean bird, a haunt for every unclean and detestable beast.
Revelation 18, verse 2. And this coincides perfectly with Yeshua's parables of the kingdom in Matthew 13, verses 31 to 33, which he likens to a tree that grows larger than all other plants in the garden, so that birds make their nests in it, and it is like thoroughly leavened dough. In Matthew 13, Yeshua explained in his parable of the sower that birds, which snatch away seeds as soon as they fall on the ground, represent the wicked one who snatches away truth from the heart of hearers before they can understand it. These are the same wicked birds that make their nests in Christianity, as pointed out in Revelation 18, verse 2. And we have already gone over the leaven angle in episode 1 of this podcast series. An account in the book of Mark also highlights the Christian experience. In Mark 11, Yeshua and his disciples cross the Sea of Galilee and arrive at the country of the Gerasenes. Some manuscripts say Gadarenes, but both were people of cities situated east of the Sea of Galilee and the Jordan River. Also, both were actually Gentile cities whose citizens were Greek rather than Semite, hence the many pigs they raised. According to Roswell D. Hitchcock, who authored the Interpreting Dictionary of Scripture Proper Names in 1869, the word Gerasene means those who come from pilgrimage or fight. At any rate, no sooner did Yeshua step off the boat than a man possessed of an unclean spirit approached him from the tombs. There is so much prophetic value here. Remember that Babylon is a dwelling place for demons and a haunt for unclean spirits, and here is a man possessed of unclean spirits living among the tombs. Also remember that Yeshua warned of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees, which is false teaching or doctrine. See Matthew 16 verses 5 to 12. Well, take note of another identifying mark. Yeshua also said,
Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you are like whitewashed tombs, which outwardly appear beautiful, but within are full of dead people's bones and all uncleanness. So you also outwardly appear righteous to others, but within you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness.
Matthew 23, verses 27 to 28. This represents Christianity, which for 2,000 years has been guilty of the same thing. This is why the man possessed of unclean spirits is seen coming from the tombs where he lived. We are also told that no one could bind the man for the strength he possessed, since he easily broke his metal bonds.
No one had the strength to subdue him.
We are told in Mark 5, verse 4. This speaks to the strength of the Catholic beast empire that conquered much of Europe under the authority of the dragon, Satan. Revelation 13, verse 4 even asks,
Who is like the beast, and who can fight against it?
Going back to Mark chapter 5, upon seeing Yeshua, the man from the tombs, filled with demons who believed Yeshua came to torment them, rushes over to Yeshua and falls at his feet. The demons beg that Yeshua not send them out of the Gentile country. Instead, and this is very telling, yet requires discernment, they spot a herd of unclean pigs numbering a certain prophetic number feeding on the hillside. Thus they said to Yeshua,
Send us to the pigs, let us enter them. So he gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out and entered the pigs, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea and drowned in the sea.
Mark 5, verses 12 to 13. About 2,000 swine to equal the 2,000 years of leaven Christianity, and into the sea they plunged, which is also prophetic. This entire 2,000-year history has revealed several things. Christianity attempted to replace true Israel, according to prophecy, and in doing so, it in fact paralleled a lot of what Israel experienced. For one thing, Augustine was like its Moses. All of the popes and Christian kings are akin to the many corrupt and unrighteous kings and priests we endured. The church was split in two, forming the Roman Catholic and Greek Orthodox branches, similar to the split between Israel and Judah. Then the Protestant Reformation forced the church to splinter into factions and spread throughout the earth, just as the divided nations of Israel and Judah were scattered among the nations. The early persecutions of the church represent the horrors of the Egyptian bondage prior to the Exodus. The repeated barbarian, Arab, and other invasions are akin to the invasions Israel suffered at the hands of the Assyrians, Babylonians, Greeks, and Romans. In short, if you want to stand in the shoes of true Israel, you must endure what they endured. In the end, when Yeshua returns, the vast majority of the world will still be Christian, Buddhist, Hindu, Muslim, and other religions, which is why only 144,000 of all the 12 tribes will be sealed in the forehead. Also, this is why in Isaiah chapter 2, verses 1 to 4, many will go up to the mountain of Yah's house to worship there and get the truth. This will be fulfilled in the millennium. To be clear, Yah raised up Christianity like he raised up the Babylonians, but that doesn't mean that the ways of ancient Babylon were pure, or that we should all be Babylonians. It was a temporary judgment, but even the corrupt nations and systems he raises up, he eventually destroys, because they are only a means to an end. This is also true of the Christian movement, which started out as the white horse of Revelation 6 verse 2, following the time of the emissaries, before it was usurped and morphed into the papal structure. If people who are in the Christian church are truly living up to what they believe, then Yah can reach them and bring them up to a higher level by removing them from that setting. This is part of the calling out process.
Then I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, lest you take part in her sins, lest you share in her plagues.
Revelation 18, verse 4. In Mark 3, verses 24 to 25, Yeshua said that a kingdom or house divided against itself cannot stand. And the fact that Christianity, which was never meant to succeed, has been divided for so long and continues to divide even today, it will not stand, nor can it usher in the kingdom. But it must exist, for it is the place from which the true servants of Yah will hail. Remember that those servants are told to come out of her. The vast majority of us who are in the truth have all passed through the Christian movement at one point or another before we were called out. Well, others are still being called out of her now. My hope is that this series will aid in that process. That wraps it up for the entire Churchianity 2000 Years of Leaven podcast. A production of KingdomPeppers.org, this series was written, produced, and hosted by yours truly, Kingdom Prepper. All praise, honor, and glory are due to my boss, Yah Elohim, and to his right hand, Yahushua HaMashiach. You can access the transcripts for this series on our website. That concludes our history. We hope you enjoyed this podcast. Shalom.